Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist with the Efficient Group, joins us this evening. Good morning, good evening, Dawie.
Good evening.
I'm going to admit something to you right now. Right up front, I'll be up front with you. I'm very, very hungover this evening. I had a very long night last night, so this could go a bit pear-shaped. I'm just warning you.
No, I'm sure. No, I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Okay, good.
Economics is always about people, and it's always fun to talk about economics.
Economics is fun.
Economists are actually funny people because they can say anything. You know, they've got carte blanche, and we can always think about reasons why we were wrong, you know.
Okay, now, this Bric thing. Okay, firstly, let's look at the world from outer space, a big picture here.
Yeah.
Because everything's changing.
You know, quite often things happen so fast you can't see it happening, and quite often things happen so slow you can't see it happening.
Okay.
Now, what we have seen, in fact, it started approximately, I would guess, about 20 years ago. The world started changing, but we're at that tipping point now. In fact, we've passed that tipping point already. And when you talk about economics, you think of things like dollars, and you think of Wall Street, and you think gold and stuff like that. All those sort of things are actually Western economic things. And the world economy really rotated or was driven the past 100 years by what's been happening in the United States. Before that, 100 years before that, it was mostly the United Kingdom. Now, we're at one of those turning points in history again. And I think you can call this a tectonic shift that is taking place in the world. About 2 or 3 years ago, let's divide the world into two. We've got the West and the rest. Included in the West, I would include a country called Japan as well, because they're pretty much a rich country.
But they're in the East.
They're in the East, I know, but it's for making life easier for me.
Okay.
So the West, including
you
Japan,
are right.
and
You
the
can
rest.
say what you want.
We can say whatever we want to. And what's been happening recently is that many new economies became part of this global village, like we like to call this, and a couple of countries that one should mentioned specifically here, and very importantly, of course, the Chinese. They've started becoming a very important players in this global village. In fact, the Chinese economy surpassed the Japanese economy, the second biggest economy in the world, a few years back already. Okay. Because depending how you measure stuff, you can measure stuff in terms of purchasing power parity, one of those difficult words but we economists discovered.
Purchasing power parity.
Don't you worry.
Okay.
So depending how you measure the economies. But officially today, China is the second biggest economy. Okay. So what's been happening, the Chinese have become much more important, and many other economies as well, like for example the Indians and the Russians, South America, particularly Brazil as well. So now we've identified the BRICS in a way already. There are many other important economies as well, like the Malaysians, the South Koreans, and the Turkish, the Turks, for example, and the Mexicans. Those are very important players in the global environment as well.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
Why is it that those four economies, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, have been lumped together? Why wasn't it Malaysia and Mexico and Turkey and India? They could have called them the MITs or something. You know what I mean? Why did the BRICS come together?
There are many other groupings of economies as well, like the civets, for example. And now we've got
there's a cut.
You can decide what you want to lump together, but it makes in a way sense to lump those big economies together for two reasons.
Okay.
The one is what's been happening to their economies. They've been growing quite strongly. The other one is for the size of their populations. And those four economies that you've just mentioned, the so-called BRIC economies, is close to about 50% of the world's population. So there are a lot of people there, and they're growing very strongly. And there's perhaps a third very important reason as well, and that's simple politics. The Chinese, they've been fairly big political players since just after the Second World, and of course we know the Russians as well, perhaps not Brazil, and I think perhaps that's where South Africa comes into. So it's a combination of all factors, and in a weird kind of way, it makes sense that you should lump those countries together, and maybe you should include Mexico and Turkey as well in those economies. But those economies have been lumped together because of their economic size and essentially because of the size of their populations.
Okay. So now we are being invited into this little grouping.
Yeah.
Is that what have they officially come to us and said, you pull in?
Yes, they have. They actually approach us. This is a kind of informal club at the moment still. It's not properly institutionalized, so it's not as if they've got a secretariat or you have to pay membership fees and all that yet. It's probably going to happen.
It's like me last night. Just went out.
Yeah, you just went there, you were a couple of guys, and you invited, you called somebody, said, come and join us.
Came together, and then it all fell apart.
But it's slowly, it's slowly moving into something more formal. They've had a couple of meetings already in Yekaterinburg, in Russia, for example. They're going to have another meeting. They've had a meeting in Brazil. The next meeting is going to be in China. So slowly the thing is getting more of a formal character. And South Africa has been invited formally to join this new body. And I think slowly it will become a more of a formal institution globally.
What does this mean for business in South Africa?
I think, well, it depends how things pan out. But I think, well, the fact that South Africa was invited in the first instance, it doesn't make sense because we're a tiny economy. The Chinese, for example, the Chinese economy is more than 20 times bigger. More than 20 times bigger than the South African economy, for instance. So we're a tiny economy. And our population at around about 50, depending who you want to include and exclude, but around about 50, is also really a tiny population compared to those giants like the Indians and the Chinese. Okay, so it doesn't make sense.
Okay, can I make sense of it? From just me, Jeremy. They want our resources.
I think that is part of it. But I think there's a bigger player. South Africa, I think there's a political angle to the whole thing as well. South Africa is really boxing well above his weight range politically. We've got a political position in the rest of the world. And of course, everybody would like to tap into that energy. So I think there's a political aspect to this as well. Secondly, I don't think it's really South Africa that got invited to become part of this Bric economy. I think it's Africa.
So they see us as the gateway into Africa.
Essentially. So officially, we're the official member in a way, I think.
Representing Africa.
Yeah. I think it's.
So I was right, they want our resources.
Yeah, but not only right. But there's nothing wrong with that. But there's nothing wrong with wanting our resources.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Why did you have to tell me all of this stuff when you could just have said,
But the politics are so important as well. It's not just only about resources. And in fact, the Chinese, they've been involved in Africa. And they're getting more and more involved in Africa, and they're investing like crazy. They're digging holes and taking stuff out of the ground. So they have been quite involved in Africa as well.
I saw something on Business Tonight. I think it was on Monday night. A very interesting piece by Chris Bishop talking about resources. He was specifically referring to coal. And Dawie, I'd like you to take a look at that.
These scenes have been the order of the day in Queensland in northeast Australia for weeks now. Flood damage has also hit the country's mines. The world's biggest miner, BHP Billiton, says its operations will be affected for at least 6 months.
Australia is the world's largest coal exporter by a decent margin, especially on met coal. Australia exports 60% of the world's metallurgical coal, and the majority of that comes from Queensland. Queensland's a huge area. It's much larger than, say, Germany, France put together. Most of that's underwater.
Australia supplies metallurgical coal to South Africa. Like many countries, it is seeing rising prices and fears of a shortage.
Domestically, there looks like we are going to see some domestic shortages of coal. And remember, there is a domestic market for about 20 million tonnes a year that's sold to everyone from breweries to paper mills to sugar mills to cement factories. They buy the same sort of coal we export. And if export prices are very good, we see those users of coal pressed. Some time ago, in 2008, for example, we saw the cement producers complain bitterly that they were having to pay much more for the coal they were using in their kilns. And we might well return to that situation where industrial users of coal in South Africa see higher prices.
There is likely to be more competition for coal this year. South Africa produces around 250 million tonnes of coal a year. In 2010, just over 63 million tonnes was exported. A third of this coal went to the power stations of India. Eskom burns just over 120 million tonnes, a lot of it poor quality, reducing power output. Eskom wants to keep more quality thermal coal at home and is calling for regulation to restrict exports.
Coal is an issue for South Africa. We have enough coal. We just have to mine it and open up the mines. And secondly, quality of coal is an issue. It's a real issue that we struggle with, and it can be a real solution, part of a solution in keeping the lights on over the next few years. And certainly we believe that as a country we need to find a mechanism to create a balance between supporting the continued export of coal in the economy and earning foreign revenue from that perspective and seeing the mining companies investing, as well as supporting power generation where we can use this resource that we have.
Eskom suggests exports should be earned by coal mines. 1 tonne of export in return for every 2 tonnes supplied to Eskom. But in this still free market, when you look at the prices, the economics are on the side of the exports. Eskom, which needs to keep power costs down, buys its coal for around $30 a tonne. Spot prices for export coal are around $125 a tonne. Incentive for big exporters to send more to the power stations of India, leading to calls for Eskom to increase prices.
Eskom simply has to pay the price that attracts the capital to build the mines. An argument on regulation only works on existing supply. Clearly, where the capital has already been sunk, it can't go anywhere else. My concern is when we need to attract new capital, and South Africa has always attracted its mining capital from abroad. When foreign investors get an opportunity to consider opportunities around the world and they sit with a list of projects, why would they choose a project in South Africa with an uncertain regulatory environment relative to a project elsewhere in the world?
Now you see, there's a whole push me, pull you thing happening here. That's just one resource. And there's a whole lot of stuff happening around that. You can see why the coal miners want to sell to overseas companies.
Get
to
better price.
To the Bric companies. So I want to come back to that point and how that could possibly affect our economy being involved with these others.